Good evening. I'm Charles Duffy, and this is Political Pulse. Tonight's guest is John Harris, who wrote the recent book, The Survivor, on Bill Clinton's presidential years. So thank you for coming.
Oh, happy to be here.
And so you covered President Clinton as a Washington Post correspondent from, what, 1995 to 2000?
Right. I came in January 1995. The context of the time you'll remember was Bill Clinton has just been humiliated in those 1994 midterm elections by Newt Gingrich. And then I followed him the remaining 6 years. I have to say, I never saw him sort of more low, more beaten than that first time I covered him. He was just physically diminished man, and the results of that midterm lower than he ever was. I ever saw him during Lewinsky, for example. So that was the first instance I saw of Bill Clinton's survival instincts, because by a year later, January '96, he was coasting to
and it was a roller coaster.
Yeah,
You covered
it
him
sure
up
was.
and down, and now we're 5 years out, and of course it's your job to cover him. But looking back at those 5 years or 6 years that you covered him, is it in a personal sense special to look back and cover such an Americana type of figure?
I think probably every reporter who spends a lot of time covering a single politician, latched onto them, and especially so when it's a president, you do feel some sense of attachment, not, any kind of personal intimacy or sense of rooting for the home team, but you do feel like, well, this guy is my story. I feel that way, incidentally, about other politicians I've covered. I spent several years in Virginia covering governors down there, and so there are those people there that I feel is sort of an affinity with. But I do feel an affinity for those years, and feel like I know him pretty well, too.
And you talk about certain of his traits, and I know one of his important traits that you point out was his resiliency, and I'll quote from your book: "He was a man of uncommon resilience, a trait that always surfaced when he needed it the most."
I think, that's why I called the book what I did. I thought that was the most sort of noteworthy thing about Bill Clinton as a politician, and about Bill Clinton as a person. The fact that he's off and down, but he's never out of the game. He'll always fight again tomorrow. And I happen to think it's the most admirable thing about him. It's the trait that you'd want in yourself or in your children, to never give up.
It's just incredible to me. You talk about the 1998 State of the Union address, and at that time he was under so much pressure. The Monica Lewinsky story was breaking. You had Ken Starr. The Linda Tripp tapes were surfacing. Vernon Jordan had admitted that he was helping Lewinsky find a job, Monica Lewinsky find a job in New York. And the president, 1 or 2 or 3 days later, had to go up and give the State of the Union address. And he did a great job. I think you called it polished and steely, but just incredible that a human being, or a man or a woman, can withstand that type of pressure. I mean, this is the president of the United States. Go up on the Hill and do something like that. Did you find that incredible?
It was astonishing, and I learned more about that specific moment, but really the larger year of 1998 in the course of reporting that book. A couple of days before that State of the Union speech you mentioned, John Podesta has talked a little bit about this, including to the Starr grand jury, but he was meeting with Clinton in the West Wing in the private study just off the Oval Office, and Clinton was an absolutely demoralized man, almost a paralyzed man. Podesta had told some colleagues in the White House, I'm just not sure he's going to make it. Literally thought the presidency was perhaps threatened. And then, I think it was maybe 72 hours later, Clinton gives that performance, really an effective State of the Union speech. Never mind the elephant in the room with Lewinsky, and Podesta leans over to a colleague and says, "Can you believe it?" to some extent, that year of Clinton sort of seemingly floating over the scandal, not bothered by it, I have to point out, was a facade. It was a mirage in a lot of ways. At the time, as a reporter, we were always writing about Clinton's great ability to quote, compartmentalize. In other words, the scandal didn't get him down, he just put it over in a box. Yeah, it turns out, and I've learned this in the course of the book, that basically was a myth. Clinton was as shaken as anyone else would be if their personal life is threatened, their family breakup, his historical reputation was threatened, his whole presidency was threatened. He often was completely overwhelmed that year, but he didn't show it in public.
But he got angry in private. And you were a reporter, but you were also a witness to history. But just, I don't know if you went to that State of the Union, but you saw everything happening, Lewinsky, Starr. And did you also say, God, I can't believe this guy can do this? Did John Harris say that personally?
I did, sure. Yeah, there's no question. I mean, that was a surreal year for us, I mean, for the nation really, but especially for us as reporters, as we're we're White House reporters. All of a sudden, find ourselves covering a sex scandal. There was a sense very much that it ain't Watergate. On the other hand, was something that raised very troubling questions. So, a lot of ways, it wasn't an especially fun year for us, but it was remarkable watching Clinton navigate through it.
And you put in there an example of his resiliency, and I thought it was kind of interesting. But in the closing days of office, Bill Clinton himself pondered his mystique of his gift for survival. And he recounted that when he was in high school, he had a car accident, and his jaw hit the steering wheel, but the steering wheel broke, not his jaw.
Yeah, it's an old yarn he's told. To explain this, he's aware that he has a penchant for getting in trouble. He's also aware that he's got a gift for getting out of it.
But as irresponsible as he was in his private life, and I think at one point in the book you said, what was he thinking? And everybody said, what was he thinking? He was just as responsible in his public life.
What I concluded in this book, and it's the distillation of 6 years covering the guy and several years since then, trying to think hard about his presidency and his legacy, but I did conclude that, Bill Clinton, at the end of the day, and Charles, trust me, sometimes it was a very long and agonizing day, but at the end of the day, Bill Clinton almost always did what he regarded as the responsible thing on policy. And I think that, on balance, the results of that on policy grounds were pretty good. It's a mixed legacy, and there's a fair amount of policy in the book and trying to assess that. But I do think there's this dichotomy that you point out between Bill Clinton, who could be really reckless in some of his personal judgments, but I think he brought a very dutiful sense of obligation to the public side of his presidency.
And it hurt, the scandal obviously hurt the country. And for instance, in 98, it was clear that the country was going to have surpluses, and he wanted to use that money to shore up Social Security and Medicare. And, to this day, we're in 2005, and those things have not happened. And obviously, those scandals hurt. He just did not have the political capital to use those surpluses.
No, he didn't. There's a tendency, I think, for people to think, well, because he survived impeachment, and the whole thing almost seems like a sort of a surreal dream at this point, looking back, like how were we in the middle of that to a lot of people. There's a tendency to think that it didn't affect his presidency. It did. After January 1998, Bill Clinton was never again in a position to challenge his own party. To my mind, some of his greatest achievements, particularly domestically, are when he pushes his own party to do things that they find uncomfortable.
Like welfare.
Welfare reform is an example. Free trade, then the NAFTA agreement of 1993, painful for Democrats to do. Bill Clinton pushed it to passage. Deficit reduction is an example of that. Clinton wasn't how Clinton wanted to find his presidency. It's not certainly how Democrats, their top priority, but he felt it was necessary. After January 98, he needs every last Democratic vote in Congress to survive, because the Republicans are trying to throw him out. So those days of pushing his party to modernize itself, to do things that aren't necessarily comfortable, pretty much came to an end. And there were a lot of missed opportunities of the balance balance of his second term. Some of the long-term entitlement programs that you mentioned are an example of that. He very much wanted to address those in his presidency. Really never got even close to coming around to it. Just wasn't going to happen.
And it also hurt the Democratic Party. And now Gore, everybody has concluded, or most people have concluded, ran a terrible race.
Right.
But without that scandal, he probably would have won in 2000.
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
But guys like Senator Daschle, and I was out in South Dakota on election night when he lost, but they pinned him as being with Clinton, and that hurt him in South Dakota. He held the line. Otherwise, Clinton could have been convicted in the Senate. So it not only hurt the country, but it really hurt the Democratic Party. Would you agree?
I would. It sounds like we're in agreement on both those questions. That Gore certainly could have run a more nimble campaign. If he did, he almost won and did win the popular vote in 2000. And he could have certainly handled the Clinton situation better than he did. He really became almost a head case about it. It was not just a political problem, but a psychological problem. How does he overcome his sort of anger at Clinton for the problems he's created? But nonetheless, Clinton was a problem, and he wasn't making that up. There were a lot of voters, as you point out, tend to be middle American heartland voters who really were by 2000 ready for a change, and they did associate Clinton's problems with the Democrats generally, and certainly Al Gore.
And when you were talking about the comparison between Gore and Clinton, it was kind of interesting because you said, hey, Clinton was a very transparent person. The way he was in public was basically the way he was in private. Maybe he was a little bit more profane, but Gore, on the other hand, was not like that. He was more two different people in public and private, and that kind of led to the awkwardness.
That's my view of it. As you point out, and I've been around Bill Clinton in plenty of private settings, and the thing is, it's one reason it's not that difficult for him to get up on the public stage and be a very effective performer is that the private Clinton and the public Clinton, there's a pretty small distance between the two of them. Most politicians, I should point out, of the ones I've covered, there is a wider distance. And in Al Gore's case, I really think there was an especially wide distance. He was not somebody who enjoyed being up on the public stage. It was an act of discipline to get up there and sort of do the performance aspects of the presidency. And if you could, it wouldn't do to say, oh, just get up there and be yourself. Because I think the private Gore is really a much more sort of radical thinker and much more sort of liberal in disposition than he was ever allowed to position himself as a Democrat in the Senate from Tennessee or a presidential candidate.
And obviously, Bill Clinton knew you were writing this book. Did he call you up, or did you interview him for the book?
I've interviewed him a dozen times or more over the course of covering him, including while I was working on this book. But he did not give me an interview for this book. The contractual obligations of his own memoir, or at least that's his attorney's view, didn't allow him to also give me an interview. I have to say I have no gripe against that, because when I tried to talk to other people who were close to Clinton, and talked to hundreds of them, whenever anybody checked with him and said, look, Harris wants to talk to me, what should I do? As far as I know, he always said, do what you want. We have about 45 seconds left to break or so, but John Harris, I mean, you come from upstate New York, but you were in the Oval Office, you were interviewing the president, and were there times when you looked around and had to pinch yourself? You have to, as a White House reporter, sort of remember that, because a lot of it is, to be honest, Charles, is drudgery, and you think like, what a hassle it is, flying around, and you want to be home and whatnot. But it is it's a pretty big privilege to cover a president, any president, as you say, be in the Oval Office, be in the center of this important story. So occasionally I did, but more often I had to slap myself and remember that I should be appreciative. Right. Well, let's take a break. We're going to be right back with John F. Harris, the author of The Survivor.
Lewis and Clark, great explorers. Hi, I'm Thomas Jefferson. Would you check out the West for me? Oh, sure. And they take their keelboat up the Missouri. Oh, Buffalo. Then they built Fort Mandan. They're at 1804. Made some friends along the way. I'm Sacagawea. Through the Columbia Gorge.
There are tons of ways to help with your kids' learning. Find the really good ones on connectforkids.org.
The sweet Pacific Ocean! Yeah!
We're back with John Harris, the author of The Survivor, which is a book about Bill Clinton's presidential years. And in your book, you talk about the animus that was directed towards Bill Clinton, mostly from the Republicans. And I think you even used the word hate. It was just so strong. And you gave you posed a couple of theories about that. But you could sense that, couldn't you, John, when you were covering Bill Clinton?
Well, I mean, anybody could sense it. You know, the amount of sort of, you know, disdain that he generated from the right. I'd say by the end of his presidency, there was a similar sort of, that was countered by, you know, similar kind of attachment toward him from the left of the Democrats. You know, by the end really came to embrace Bill Clinton. But at the beginning, he had all the animus that you described, but not really the so much support from either the traditional liberals or the center in politics, because his presidency was really flailing at the beginning. So, yeah, I mean, this sense of hatred that he inspired, what really colored his presidency in important ways.
But picture this in your mind. Picture that Bill Clinton took over and there was a big surplus, and then after a few years, you know, there was a big deficit, and that he went to war on a mistaken premise. Gas was over $2.50 a gallon. I mean, spending on things like the drug bill. I mean, I think this administration missed estimating the cost on the drug bill by over $100 and some billion, which is pretty incredible. But it seems to me that, and I can't put my finger on it, John, but it seems, and these things, of course, are happening right now under this administration, and there's certain reasons that this administration gives for them, but there's not that type of animus directed towards George W. Bush and his administration. And I can't put my finger on why. I mean, if Clinton was president when all this happened, the level of heat would be incredible. Would you agree?
I guess I wouldn't, in that I do think that Bush inspires a degree of opposition on the left that's certainly equivalent to what Clinton did on the right. I would agree that Bush has been much more successful at kind of keeping the sort of forces of opposition, or you know, from my line of work in the news media, the forces of accountability, much better at keeping those to heel and not letting them overwhelm the presidency, as often happened under Clinton. The reasons for that are complex, and it's a much longer thing, but just to quickly rattle them off, I do think the post 9/11 environment is part of it. I do think that probably the biggest part of it is that the Bush benefits by having his majority in Congress. There's no independent counsel law to cause legal problems, and there's no congressional oversight, particularly, that causes problems. And then the other thing, and this happened in the Clinton years, but it's become much more intense since then. You know, the country is so divided into camps, so polarized, to use that word, that's you know, so frequent now, but it is true that basically people have chosen up teams, and if you're a Bush supporter, all those things you mentioned aren't going to really fundamentally shake your confidence in him. You know, if you're a Bush opponent, there's not really the arguments aren't really meeting in the center. People have sort of divided up camps. I think Bush benefits from that.
And I think there's also, they're very good at the White House. I mean, these are, you know, professionals running the White House. And I use as an example when the Rove leak, the alleged CIA leak came out, and it was gaining some steam. All of a sudden, the president announces his Supreme Court nomination. I mean, these guys are good.
Oh, yeah, I think you can, Charles, overstate that there's a certain bag of tricks that any White House has for trying to change a story or distract attention. What they are, that is true in contrast with Clinton, is they're very sort of self-confident, and they aren't easily made nervous or thrown off their game by, you know, really difficult political problems.
And some people, and this is kind of anecdotal, John, but some people say the press is softer on George W. Bush. And one example, and of course you were not at this press conference, you had left the beat, but at the press conference before George Bush went to war with Iraq, no one asked him, hey, what if there's no weapons of mass destruction? What's your plan then? Would you, because is the press a little bit easier on George W. Bush than they were on Clinton?
Well, I would go back to that list that I mentioned, because I think the confluence of factors is one thing that sort of creates this impression that the press has given Bush a pass. I do think the press didn't fully explore the idea that there might not be weapons of mass destruction, because basically we were under the belief, like Bush, that there were, and most Democrats were as well. Bill Clinton was, as he said.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of also, you have a quote in here that I thought was interesting. You basically compared Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, and you used a Greek fable as kind of the basis. And you said, the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. Clinton was a classic fox. He was driven less by ideology than by experience and contingency. His words and his actions could at times seem contradictory, his true intentions and priorities opaque even to the people closest to him. Bush proved to be a classic hedgehog. In the wake of the September 11th attacks, he tended to see all decisions through the prism of security and the terrorist threat. The challenge of leadership, as Bush framed it, was above all a matter of conviction, in which the hard part of governance was not deciding right from wrong, but pursuing right with sufficient devotion in the face of setbacks and criticisms. In the Clinton and Bush presidency, history has crafted an experiment of sorts about which model of leadership is more productive. So you compare their kind of strategies or their manner of leaderships, and you say basically the jury's still out, and which is
that metaphor, and I'm sure some of your viewers will recognize it, because Isaiah Berlin is a philosopher, a British philosopher who studied American politics. He wrote this essay, "The Hedgehog and the Fox." The hedgehog knows one big thing. The fox knows lots of little things. And Bush, I think, is a classic sort of hedgehog. He's sort of organized around a couple of big ideas, whereas Clinton was a fox, and he often pursuing contradictory ends. The experiment, in my view, is just really going to depend on what the results of the Bush presidency are. I think it's much more likely that George W. Bush could go down historically as a horrible, failed president, or much more likely that if he catches breaks in Iraq, and that this big bet that he's placed on a new Middle East turns out to be true, that he'd be seen as a really historically consequential president, in a way that I don't think Bill Clinton is ever likely to fall into either camp. He really is sort of solidly in the middle, in that he had, I think, at the end, an effective policy record, but never marked by these really large sort of historic bets on which direction the country was headed. He was too much on the defensive to have that kind of presidency.
And you talk about his contingencies and experience, and he does not deny that he may have gone to war. I'm talking about Bill Clinton in Iraq recently, I think in an article in the New York Magazine. But do you think that he would have dealt with the evidence of the weapons of mass destruction differently? Because he seemed like in kind of a counterpuncher, kind of weigh everything, look closely at things. I'm not sure if you said
I'm pretty confident Bill Clinton would not have gone to Iraq, to war in Iraq, because he is somebody that is very attuned to criticism and dissent, and the decision to go to Iraq was, especially abroad, even before we knew about the weapons of mass destruction, not being there was generating intense opposition from other world leaders. And I think, as a matter of philosophy, Bill Clinton does believe that the world should act in alliances whenever possible, but also a matter of personal temperament. He never would have defied all that criticism that Bush and Cheney did. I just don't ever see that he would have gone to Iraq.
And at the end of his presidency in 2000, the president had been through a lot. The press who covered him had been through a lot. You guys were all tired, it seemed like to me. And then at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, you talk about that in your book in April of 2000. And there was peace and prosperity generally in the country. There's a surplus. Hillary was running for Senate. And Bill Clinton came to the White House Press Correspondents' Dinner and he did a video clip that poked fun at himself, like the country was kind of running itself. He was cutting hedges and washing the car and packing Hillary's lunch. And after the video clip stopped and the lights went up, the press and everybody in the crowd stood up, as you recounted, stood up and gave him a standing ovation. And playing along with that, or not playing along, but Bill Clinton said, "You like me, you really like me," mimicking Sally Field from her Oscar acceptance speech. But there seemed like you guys had been through a lot together, and you just...
I think there was an appreciation by the end of Clinton's presidency, and it's certainly grown in the 5 years since then, that even among his sort of political opponents, there came to be an appreciation for him as an outsized personality, as an American original, as a survivor, as somebody who, took all the punches and was still there. And some of that feeling, it was almost, even though his presidency was still going on, it was in its closing months, that sense of nostalgia was kind of coming to fore at that dinner.
Mm-hmm. And you had some thank yous in your book, and you're a very gifted writer, and I enjoyed the book. One of the thank you, obviously, your wife and your kids and your friends, but you also thanked your mother, Nancy Hamlin, and you said, who gave you a love of language from an early age. What did you mean by that?
Oh, she's somebody, Charles, that always has loved reading, loved books, and conveyed that a sense of the importance of that. If you were to go to visit her home, she's from Rochester, New York. A huge wall of books, a lifelong collection. So I think some of that just by osmosis I picked up.
And is she going around Rochester, New York saying, "Hey, John Harris is my son"?
Yeah, and it's not even optional, it's compulsory. You've got to buy it if she gets on you. It's easier just to give up and buy the damn book than tell her no.
Mm-hmm. And it seemed like you concluded that the Clinton's presidency, going back to Bill Clinton, it survived because most citizens accepted him as he was and wished him to stay where he was.
I think that's right. All through that year of Lewinsky, Clinton's not personal approval rating, which was often kind of low in the 40s or just barely at 50%, but his job approval rating, how's he doing as president, was 65, sometimes even in the 70s. The country didn't really, to my view, learn that much new about Bill Clinton during that year of Lewinsky. All the revelations that came out basically were consistent with things that people suspected, but they decided that, taken as a whole, better or worse, that this guy they wanted to hang around. They didn't want him out of office. That's why he made it through that year.
Any word whether Bill Clinton's read the book?
I think he's, from what I understand, I have not heard from him directly, but from people around him, I think he's leafed through it selectively. He's read the reviews pretty intently. It's obviously not the story that he would have written the way he would have told it. He wrote his own book for that. Mine's half the length, I should point out.
But any word on whether he enjoyed it?
I don't think enjoyed it because it's just not how he would have told the story. But I do think he feels, from what I've heard, that a lot of what the reviewers said, that it was a fair attempt. Tried to be fair.
I thought it was a great book, John.
I sure appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on Political Pulse.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And remember, if it's Tuesday night at 9:30 or Thursday at 9, it's Political Pulse on Channel 16. I'm Charles Duffy. We'll see you next week.